I think the more time passes, the more we talk about anything and everything Modern Warfare, I believe that we can uncover more details and the thinking behind some of the characters' decisions. I think Commander Graves is a prideful and proud soldier that has a lot of good survival skills. I think he spent some time in Las Almas and he saw how corrupt it was and all the deaths that it caused by the sicarios that were present in the city. I think he had a right to distrust any military branch in Mexico as he didn't really know any better. And he saw the Mexican military attack Task Force 141 and Alejandro. But Graves may have believed that Alejandro was willing to sacrifice a few of his men to keep up the lie that he was actually under the command of El Sin Nombre. I believe that since their first encounter, he may have told his men to be vigilant for anything or anyone that would seem a bit suspicious. I think the doubt really began to creep sometime during their stakeout of El Sin Nombre's mansion. Graves says, "Let's go in. I have enough shadows to take over the whole country." But Alejandro says, "No." Now, to us, this seems like a reasonable thing and we can understand it. Like, we, of course, don't want you to invade our damn country. But to Graves, it may have seemed like he was trying to avoid going inside, maybe buy El Sin Nombre some time. Then when we capture El Sin Nombre, she clearly recognizes Alejandro and he clearly recognizes her. This kind of makes Graves angry and he is curious as to how they know each other.
Have a seat. All right, how do you two know each other?
No is a strong word.
Las palabras fuertes son importantes. Nuestra palabra es nuestro valor, ¿no?
De la verga, hija de puta, que te voy a matar.
Calmado, comandante.
Ya.
And although Alejandro explains why, and again to us it may seem true and easy to understand, I can also see why the commander of a PMC with not much knowledge of Las Almas would be worried that Alejandro may actually be playing everyone and is indeed helping or at least working with Valeria in some way. This would cause Graves to keep a close eye on Alejandro as he would be worried that at any point he may turn on them. And then when Alejandro storms out in an angry fit, Graves could have perceived this as a show or a fake reaction to avoid getting the information out of Valeria. I think Graves realizes that he may want to watch out for himself and his operators. That's why I think he gave the order to take over Los Vaqueros base when they were gone and to capture all of their soldiers. I think this was done to avoid them getting the jump on him as he had already grown distrust towards Alejandro and doubted his true intentions. When we get to the oil rig, Graves is accompanied by Soap and Ghost, two operators that he clearly trusts way more than Alejandro. He probably didn't want the colonel near him for a fear of betrayal when no one was looking. Now, during the oil rig operation, we see Graves actively helping and happy to work with both of the Special Air Service operators. He is seen celebrating and smiling with both Soap and Ghost, and he even embraces Soap.
Gold Eagle actual Shadow 1. Good hit. Good hit. Missile and rig destroyed.
Copy that, Shadow 1. Good work. Now get off that X and go home. So, Ghost, thanks for a job well done.
Roger that, actual.
We're RTB, men.
After this, they continue on their way. I think this is extremely telling and supports the fact that Graves trusted and enjoyed working with Task Force 141. However, the same could never be said for Alejandro and Los Vaqueros. Now here's where the big turn happens, and we have to remind ourselves of something very important. Graves was willing to let Soap and Ghost leave freely, as their part in the operation was done according to General Shepard.
You boys have been relieved. Thank you for your service.
Now, Alejandro was a different story. I'm pretty sure that Commander Graves wanted to interrogate him for his own purposes. When we reach this point, we realize that things could have been handled very differently. Soap and Ghost could have just left and informed Captain Price about what just occurred. And then Price would have probably gone to Kate Laswell, and then she would have gone to Shepard. But things didn't go this way. Things turned bad really fast. Graves immediately gets defensive when Alejandro tried to approach him. He had reason to distrust the colonel for a while now, and I think that he felt no need to pretend anymore, and that's why he probably said this.
No, I don't take orders from you.
Didn't Valeria say that? Now that makes me wonder what else I don't know about your affiliation with the drug lord.
What the fuck did you just say to me, pendejo? Lying Graves.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Now, Alejandro's reaction reinforces Graves' own thoughts. He doubles down, and when Soap tries to interfere, he warns them again.
No one needs to get hurt here.
Are you threatening us?
Soldier, I don't make threats. I make guarantees. So let's not do this.
I'm calling Shepard.
General Shepard sends his regards. He told me y'all wouldn't take this well.
He didn't just turn around and start shooting everybody. He tried to de-escalate the situation, take control of the matter, and move on, like soldiers do. He had his orders, and he expected that Soap and Ghost take theirs as well.
I've got my orders, and now you have yours.
And who the fuck do you think you are, cabrón? My men are inside!
I'm afraid not. Your men have been detained.
Emotions got out of control, and when Alejandro attacked him, he restrained him. However, some of what happens next could be blamed on an operator of Graves. It's very important to note that Graves did not fire on Soap. It was one of his men that fired on him. After this, there was no stopping it. I think Graves didn't want the fight, not out of fear, but out of respect. Even after Soap escapes, Graves calls Ghost brother.
That was a big mistake, brother. Did not have to be like this.
And I really don't think this is due to Graves' speech, his slang, or where he's from. I think that he does this because he genuinely wished this would have gone a different route. Graves is a commander first and foremost. I think he followed his instincts and his experience when making these tough decisions. Was he right to have a distrust of Los Vaqueros? Absolutely. Does that make it right or wrong? I think that's for you to decide. In Call of Duty Black Ops 2, Raul Menendez stands out as a complex and compelling antagonist. While he is framed as the villain of the story, his motivations and actions can be seen as justified when viewed through a particular lens. Far from being a one-dimensional terrorist, Menendez emerges as a revolutionary who sought to expose the deep flaws in the global order. By examining his background, his critique of Western imperialism, and the global inequalities he sought to address, it becomes clear that Menendez's cause was rooted in a legitimate struggle for justice and empowerment of the oppressed. In fact, one could argue that Raul Menendez was right in his actions, even though his methods were extreme. To understand why Menendez was right, we must first look at the events that shaped him. His deep-seated hatred for the United States and the West was not born from blind ambition or an insatiable thirst for power. Rather, it was the direct result of a personal tragedy. Menendez's family would be affected by the U.S. forces many times, and on one occasion, Josefina, his sister, would be injured badly during a U.S. raid, and a few years later, she would be killed by U.S. forces. And Menendez saw these U.S. raids as a brutal violation of his personal life and a manifestation of how U.S. foreign policy often devastates the lives of civilians in weaker nations. For Menendez, Josefina's death symbolized the broader suffering inflicted by Western imperialism on vulnerable populations. From this perspective, his desire for revenge becomes not only understandable, but justified. The loss of a loved one in such a brutal, impersonal way would drive anyone to seek justice. In Menendez's case, his revenge was not solely personal, but tied into a broader critique of the system that allows such tragedies to occur. His vendetta against the United States was in essence a fight against a world order that allowed suffering in countries like his own. Menendez's ideology, as represented by his populist movement Cortes Die, presented a powerful critique of Western imperialism. For centuries, the United States and other global superpowers have exerted their influence on weaker nations, often for economic and strategic gain. These interventions, justified under the guise of promoting democracy or fighting terrorism, frequently leave destruction in their wake. Menendez understood this all too well, having witnessed firsthand how the U.S. used its military and economic power to destabilize his home country, Nicaragua. Through Cortes Die, Menendez rallied millions of people around the world who felt the weight of these interventions. His message resonated with the global underclass, the impoverished, the disenfranchised, populations who were often the collateral damage of U.S. foreign policy. These people saw Menendez not as a terrorist, but as a liberator, someone willing to stand up to the powerful forces that had long oppressed them. In this way, Menendez's actions were not just about personal revenge, they were about rectifying centuries of global injustice. The fact that Menendez managed to inspire such a large movement demonstrates the legitimacy of his cause. Cortes Die, under his leadership, was not a terrorist organization in the traditional sense, but rather a revolutionary movement for the oppressed. The support Menendez garnered was indicative of the deep dissatisfaction people felt towards the global status quo, where power and wealth were concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority suffered. Menendez tapped into his frustration and gave a voice to the voiceless. His movement was a challenge to the global elite, the corporations and governments that profited from the exploitation of others. While his methods were violent, they were arguably a necessary response to the systematic violence perpetrated by global superpowers.
It was taken from me. Do you know what that feels like yet? An American torched the warehouse for insurance money. $11,000. That was the value they placed on her life. She was the reason for me to live. What about you, David? What drives you? Is it me? Einstein once said that the economic anarchy of capitalism is the real source of evil. Your father and his people took Josefina from me. Pues, tu papá está muerto. Your father is dead. And his people finished.
In this context, Menendez's actions can be viewed as a form of justified rebellion. A rebellion against a system that had long profited from the suffering of others. Now, many of you may argue that Menendez's use of terrorism and mass destruction disqualifies him from being right. However, history is filled with examples of revolutionaries who resorted to violence in their struggle for justice. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, and countless others all involved violent acts that, in retrospect, were seen as necessary to overthrow oppressive systems. Menendez's actions, extreme as they were, can be seen in a similar light. He was fighting a global system that had long used violence, military, economic, and political, against weaker nations. In many ways, he was simply using the tools of the powerful against them. Now, Menendez's actions were not driven by greed or personal gain, unlike traditional terrorists or dictators. He had no desire for wealth or control. His sole aim was to dismantle the systems that had caused so much suffering in his life and the lives of countless others. His violence was targeted at those who he saw as responsible for the oppression of his people, global elites, corrupt governments, and militaries that profited from war. Raul Menendez's actions in Call of Duty Black Ops 2 were not the mindless acts of a villain, but the calculated moves of a man who had been wronged by a global system of oppression. His critique of Western imperialism and his efforts to rally the disenfranchised masses under Cortes Dai speak to the legitimacy of his cause. Though his methods may have been extreme, and they were rooted in a desire for justice and retribution against those who had long profited from the suffering of others. In this sense, Raul Menendez was right, not because of the destruction that he caused, but because of the ideals that he fought for. Now, you may ask me, do I believe that Raul Menendez was right? Hell no.
I want to address these allegations head on. Are we developing such a weapon? No, we are not. Because we've already developed it. But with all due respect, the United Nations is a relic from a different time when nations were unique in their ability to solve the world's problems. But that just isn't the case anymore. Primarily because you have outsourced the job to me. I have sent people to die in your wars. So I feel uniquely qualified to tell you, your wars don't work. Which is why my priorities have changed from profits to policy. Because politicians don't know how to solve problems, but I do. So let's be clear. I am here to solve the world's problems. And I believe the world's problems begin with you.
Call of Duty Advanced Warfare introduced us to Jonathan Irons, the powerful CEO of the Atlas Corporation, who saw the world for what it was: broken, chaotic, and controlled by governments he believed were too weak to fix it. While he was ultimately portrayed as the villain, his views on war, power, and the failure of global leadership had a lot of truth to them. He believed that the world needed strong leadership and that private military companies could do what regular governments couldn't. And the only way to create true peace was through absolute control. Looking at the events of the game, it's easy to see why Irons may have been right all along. One of Iron's biggest arguments was that the government were too slow and weak to stop major threats. Throughout history, we've seen politicians argue and delay action while real problems continue to grow. In advanced warfare, that is exactly what happened. The terrorist group KVA, led by Hades, launched a devastating global attack, and instead of preventing it, world governments failed to stop them in time. When the KVA detonated a massive nuclear-like device, killing thousands and causing worldwide destruction, the response from world leaders was too slow and disorganized. Now, I know some of you might say Jonathan Irons knew about this explosion and he could have stopped it, but I think he saw a way to really influence the decisions going forward, and that's why he let it happen. He needed a sacrifice. He needed somebody to make that sacrifice, and he made the sacrifice of knowing, and he allowed it to happen. That's fucking cold, I know, but that is what occurred. And after this attack, Atlas stepped in immediately. They provided security, technology, stability in ways that the government just couldn't. Irons here tried to prove that a well-equipped, privately controlled military force can respond faster and more efficiently than outdated political systems. Irons also understood a fundamental truth, that war is never really going away. Nations are always going to fight over resources, power, ideology, or anything else they can think of. Rather than pretending that peace is possible through diplomacy alone, he believed that managing a war like a business, efficiently, strategically, and with clear goals was the way to go. In the real world, we see that conflicts like in the Middle East or tensions between world superpowers and constant political disputes just make it more clear that war is part of human nature almost. Irons believed that instead of letting war be chaotic and unpredictable, it should be controlled by those strong enough to do so. In advanced warfare, Atlas shows exactly how this can work. By becoming the strongest military power, they dictate when and how conflicts happen, preventing unnecessary destruction while keeping order. Another major point that Jonathan Irons made was that the PMC companies were simply better than government-run armies. Unlike national forces that rely on slow decision-making, outdated strategies, political influence, and so much more, PMCs operate with efficiency and advanced technology. Atlas was a perfect example of this. Their soldiers are just better trained, their weapons and exoskeletons make them stronger, and their leadership isn't controlled by what he perceived a weak politician. In contrast, world governments in advanced warfare struggled to even protect their own citizens. And the KVA attacks proved it. But with Atlas, Irons is able to step in and restore order quickly, showing that PMCs are the future of warfare. At least that was what his point was. One of the most compelling arguments that Irons made was that war was profitable, and not just for PMCs, but for governments as well. The military-industrial complex, where corporations, politicians benefit from ongoing wars. And this has been a reality for decades. Weapon manufacturers, defense contractors, and even world leaders make money from conflicts, ensuring that war never truly ends. Irons saw through this corruption, and he believed that the only way to break the cycle was to take control himself. Instead of letting politicians and arms dealers fuel endless wars for their own gain, he wanted Atlas to be the dominant force, deciding when and where conflicts happened. By taking war out of the hands of corrupt leaders, he believed that he could create real stability. At the heart of Irons' philosophy was the idea that the world needed a new form of leadership. He believed that democracy, as it currently existed, was broken. Politicians always made empty promises, governments always failed to protect their people, and chaos reigned no matter what. So his solution was that he should lead the world, a single, powerful force that could make tough decisions without anyone interfering, so he could get the things done quickly. In advanced warfare, we see how that might have been necessary. Again, after the KVA attacks, world governments just struggled to rebuild, while Atlas came in and provided everything that everyone needed. People trusted Atlas because of this. They saw results. Irons didn't just talk about fixing the world. He actively did it, and it made him a great public figure and loved among the people. His methods may have been extreme, but his vision was clear. A world without weak leadership, controlled by those strong enough to enforce order, can actually change the world.
An operation on foreign sovereign soil, it would be an act of war without congressional approval.
Atlas is an internationally registered private company. We don't need Congress. Gentlemen, are we operational?
We're at the ready, sir. You're the trigger.
I want your team on the ground in 6 hours.
On whose authority?
On my authority!
Now, Jonathan Irons is portrayed as the villain of advanced warfare. But when you think about it, was he wrong? He recognized the failures of government, the inefficiency of national armies, and the corruption of the military-industrial complex. He saw war as a reality of human nature and believed in controlling it rather than letting it spiral out of control. Most importantly, however, he proved that a private military force like Atlas was more than capable of maintaining global security and better equipped at it than any government could be. Of course, his downfall came from his belief in absolute control. He was willing to crush anyone who opposed him, let innocents die and suffer, because his vision of peace relied on forcing the world to obey him. But if we separate his methods from his ideas, it's hard to argue that he was completely wrong. The world is chaotic, war is constant, and weak governments continue to fail their people, right? At least that's what he believed. Maybe in some ways, Jonathan Irons had the right idea all along. But the reality of the fact was that he was a villain. While his observations about global instability and government failure had some merit to it, his approach of ruling through fear, dictatorship, and mass destruction was what made him a villain. Ultimately, he replaced one flawed system with an even more dangerous one.